Hey everyone, welcome to SF Garnish Music Production. My name is Justin Anchetta and I'm here for West Coast Wednesdays, every Wednesday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Today's a special day because I have a special guest, Kristian, all the way from the UK. He's going to be talking about beats, how to do odd timing beats within Ableton, and we're going to get pretty deep into the overall mix of this. Kristian Sharpe is a drummer and a producer, and he's been teaching Ableton for years now, and I consider him one of the masters of the game. He's new to the SF Garnish roster. If you want to check that out, you go to sf.garnishmusicproduction.com. Welcome, Kristian. How you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much, Justin. Cheers for having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time here. And yeah, you kind of told me like a brief description of what you want to go through in regard to drumming and odd timing. And right away, I was super inspired by odd timing because a lot of DJs and producers to a click track, they do 2, 4, 8, 16, like in that really square zone. And yeah, I was excited to see what kind of things you were going to be talking about here.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm into. You know, sound design, production, chord sequences, melodies, fantastic, all amazing. But there are, to me, as a drummer, there's sort of territory that I think took a while for producers to begin to explore. So right back in the beginning when you were chaining kind of MIDI instruments together and there was latency or things were triggered by control voltage, you know, from modular synths, there would be sort of slip and slide in sequences and everything wasn't quite as tight as it could be. And then we kind of all went inside the box in these DAWs and we were able to kind of over quantize, as I think of it, many of the components that we put together. And then we try to fight for space in the mix because things are happening temporally, spectrally, all at the same time, on top of each other. And then I think really excitingly, this kind of idea of slipping and moving stuff around and not being all quarter notes, you know, eighth notes, 16th notes, super on the grid. You start to displace stuff and you get some really interesting results. And that, I want to talk a bit about that today. Play also with some techniques for creating kind of unique polyrhythms and just looking at displacing and playing with timing as a means of a kind of production technique to make your stuff sound unique. And you know, that's kind of where I want to go today. Nice.
And do you use the push in your production, or which hardware?
Yeah, I do use Push 2. I hadn't really got anything so much for this session, but I am in front of my Push 2, and I think I kind of mainly use it for the pads, actually. I've got a great big 27-inch screen here, and I'm quite, you know, I'm into it with the mouse and keyboard. I think where the Push 2 really comes into its own is launching scenes, playing melodies, looping and playing around with resampling stuff live. That's a great opportunity to then be able to kind of not have to look at a screen whilst you're on stage, because it does look a little bit like you're checking your social media. Nobody actually believes that you're really looking at the software. So it's a great bit of kit for that. I love Push. I like the fact that it's laid out differently to a keyboard because it forces me to reapproach making chords and melodies as well. And the scale function's wonderful as well if you want to just plow through stuff without hitting the wrong note, if you want to work within a particular mode or something like that, or a scale. So yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. And I've heard just a piece of this because you did that little demo for Ableton for us just a bit ago. And I really liked how I saw the MIDI just coming off from grid. And I'm sure going to go into it, but I was kind of curious around the quantization. And I know that sometimes you can do like the swing amount, but I think there's more than that. Are you purposely moving things by hand as well?
I am. I will use quantization at times, but once the quantization of, say, a particular instrument, if we break the drum kit down into different instruments, hi-hats, toms, kick and snare mainly, what I'll then do is then take that whole section and displace that in relation to other components. That's one of the techniques. So it sounds like a drummer's right arm is a little bit lazier than the left, that kind of thing. And I do find that, the best word I can use for it is wonky, because you're kind of time remapping, you're playing around with the timing. But yeah, a mixture of kind of using shuffle and using quantization to make the pattern, but the pattern might not always start exactly on the beat you would imagine it to. So the hi-hat might be a little bit later than the kick drum and stuff, and you get this flam and displacement. So I could show you now if you like.
Absolutely, yeah, let's get into it.
We could share. Let me just quickly share the screen. You should be able to see that now.
I can.
Yeah, I could hide that. Yeah, okay. So, yes, the track in question, funnily enough, I tend to, when I'm doing a tutorial video, I feel a bit reluctant to go backwards and find material, even though there's plenty of stuff I could include. So what I'm guilty of is actually using it as an opportunity to write a new piece of music. So that's what ended up happening. In fact, I think for that one tutorial I did for Garnish about the risers, there were 3 pieces of music came from that, and this one was the one that ended up being the one that I'm going to use. So
beautiful.
Perhaps if I play a section leading up and then let the drums come in, we'll get an overview of the sound of the whole piece when the beat's kicked in, and then what I'll do is I'll go back and solo the drums, and we'll take a look at what's actually happening with the individual components, and possibly listen to that against the metronome as well to get some timing reference, because I think people could potentially prepare for listening to stuff that some people aren't used to. Actually, that wonkiness and that displacement, I think, can take a little bit of time. Being a bit of an obsessive drummer, that's what I spend my time doing. Yeah, okay. So let me just start from here.
Didn't have to stop to say it. You never had to put your heart on the line. You never had to put your heart on the line. You never had to put your heart.
So that kind of this is the kind of thing I write: big fat wonky beats, great big synths, and enormous lashings of reverb. That's just the kind of environment I like to have my music in, really.
It sounds great. The hi-hat was just so on the backbeat, it almost sounded like it was on the off. But I was like, is it on the off or the down? It's right after the down, I think.
Yeah. Well, the crazy thing is I'm by far not the first to have approached this kind of thing, and I really am emulating the people that I aspire to and admire. There's a long list of them. There's a big scene in Bristol for kind of dubby, wonky, displaced kind of very, very underground, and nothing like as much melody as this has got in it, and even this one's kind of not that melodic. So looking at the drums, there is actually plenty of stuff going on. That so I'm wondering which the best way to go about this, I think, would be have a little listen to the beat on its own, and then I'll start breaking that down as well, and we can solo stuff out.
Actually, could you put the click on with that?
Absolutely,
just
yeah.
to kind of show how behind it is.
So I'm running the click in double time, a little bit like you do sort of dubstep, bro step. So there's a lot. It's you know, it's let's have a look. Kind of, it's nearly a semiquaver out. You know, it's displaced, but they're eighth notes. So I could just probably just do that and just listen to the. Yeah, so that is, to me, that's how, you know, you can push things in quite an extreme way. I think the key thing to mention is that in your production, when you're displacing drums, when you're displacing synths, because you can do this with any instrument, I think it's really important that you have something that is an anchor, that is quite in time solidly, and the ear attaches itself to that. And then what happens is when you start displacing other components around that, you've got this anchor that you're listening to. It could be a pulsating synth, and everything else you hear early or late is kind of in context with that. So obviously the opposite of that would be displacing everything the same amount, and you wouldn't hear it, because the only reason you'd know it is late is by actually putting the metronome on. But if you've got some things that are pulled forward and some things are pushed back and some things that sit in the middle and they're sonically quite different to each other, then you make this space for each sound that comes in, and it's less likely going to clash with something. And it's a very fine balance between achieving that result and achieving an absolute mess and its clutter. And I think it takes quite a lot of experimentation with the production and a lot of faith and patience to be able to work with individual components within your production, displace them and see if that works, and see if you might be pushing the wrong thing forward or the wrong thing backwards and stuff. So there isn't one fix, you know, meets all requirements. It's on a track by track basis,
and a trial and error a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes your drums will be absolutely solid to the grid, and then it's your synth that's sitting back on the beat, like the hi-hat is here. So it will be different components, and it's that all creates for me, again, wonky. It all creates a particular style of wonky, and it sort of feels like the track is pulling forwards all the time. There's this sense of urgency, or it feels like the track's sat back, and stuff. Yeah,
nice. So looking at that hi-hat, I'm like trying to kind of make sense of the grid, and often I'm like, okay, it's backed by the same amount always, but that's not the case. Like, I feel like sometimes it's like the first two are good, but then it's like a triplet, maybe kind of a triplet.
So if I move it like that,
oh, I see.
And that's all it's doing. It's just a very slight swing.
Yeah. Oh, I see. So you literally just took the entire thing and slid it back to where it felt
I've
good.
just moved. So this is what I was saying about basically having a pattern that exists. It's weird because the ear will be attracted and know that it's a solid pattern, but where it falls in context with everything else is a separate thing. It doesn't actually destroy the pattern. It's quite, I'm going a bit deep, but it's so long as you've got a phrase, it's a little bit like, you know, it's a mistake the first time, you know, with funny loops that you sample. It sounds a bit weird the first time. You hear it over and over, and suddenly your brain's like, I love that, you know, and you get into the repetitivity, and our ears very attracted to phrases, but it doesn't mean to say that all phrases must start at exactly the same time. There are timing nuances we can explore and we can exploit, and that's just one of them. So, I mean, that is kind of, it's the opposite of a shuffle, because the first two notes are closer together rather than it's like it's an upside down. So it's between the second and the third, you know, note that's kind of spaced out. But it's nearly just playing, you know, semiquavers, or at this tempo it would be eighth notes, 16ths and eighths. So perhaps if I re-enable that lot, we've got some components in here that are look like they are bang on the grid. But the reason that they're bang on the grid is because they've got so much of they've got a long attack time to them. So actually the transient that you hear is late. So there's another thing, is I guess if you've got sounds that are already have a kind of a bit of a long attack to them and don't have an immediate transient, you can afford to sort of put them a bit further forward or something, because so if I just switch those off, hang on, hit the wrong button, my microphone's in the way of my keyboard. Right, so now let's listen to those shakers along. So actually that's reasonably in time.
That sounds way different on the grid that way.
Yeah, what I forgot to do is put those back. That's pretty much how they were, I think. Yeah, so they are flamming. When you study Latin percussion, an awful lot of it, you may well know, is about timing nuances, and you have these flams. You have these two notes at a time, just one after the other, happening either through one musician doing it or between. So they, and also did a bit of djembe stuff in the Gambia a few years ago, and was learning kind of their rhythms. And you have to put your mind in a completely different place altogether, because their sense of timing is so flexible, but not flexible in a way that means it's ambiguous as to where they're going to be from one bar to the next. It's flexible within the structure, so it's a very solid beat, and then some of the patterns are perfectly displaced, and they get that through kind of counting subdivisions that might be odd numbers, and then leaving some notes out. And we can chat, and I can show you a little bit about that. Got a big fat bass drum. So basically the first one is bang on the beat, second one is displaced. They are pretty solid. So the kick is being the anchor, the downbeats are being the anchor. They are on the grid.
Nice. So it looks like everything's like off the grid to the back, except for like one of the snares maybe that you brought forward. There's a reason for that one.
Yeah, that's the kind of main snare, but there's a bit of crunch, I would say, either side of the main snare. So rather than it going to pop, there's a bit of a bump. It crunches in, and hopefully kind of makes kind of one funky sounding snare. I wonder what would happen if I actually I've made a copy of it, and if I just quantize the living daylights out of it.
All that wonky awesomeness is gone.
I mean, I really like that as well.
It does sound good, but
I think the reason it sounds still wonky is because of this. These kind of funny shakers here, but actually in the snare, see, the snare sounds kind of like those three together sound like one kind of snare now, and it's lost that kind of crunch into it. But
yeah, that hi-hat on the off really makes a big difference to my ear. Yeah, it still works, but it ends up not having that uniqueness that you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe there's room for that further on in the track. It could have a moment that's that's more solid, and something else could be wonky somewhere else in the instrument, in the instrumentation. So I mean, just That's reasonably solid. Something else to try and do is when you're kind of sequencing material on Serum, Vital, Massive, or something like that, even FM8 or operators, try to use envelopes that reloop parts and then get them kind of working slightly out of time with each other to kind of try and make things. But I don't know whether I'm actually going to be able to find that though. A lot of these are just individual. That's the kind of thing I mean. So if I... Yeah, so you can sort of hear there's a latency of sorts with this trem super saw, and that's simply the drawable grid kind of based envelope shaping that you can get on these kind of various different synths, where you've massive, like I was saying, Massive, Vital, Serum. They all give you the opportunity to draw in or step sequence the envelope and then apply that to a filter, or drag it and apply it to the amplitude. So I've used that to kind of shape the envelope of the amplitude of that sound.
Nice. Side chaining, right? Is that what you're doing?
There's also sidechain in there as well. Absolutely, yeah. Taken from the kick.
Yeah, it's like cutting out quite a bit. I noticed something.
Yeah, cutting out the kind of downbeats. Basically every crotchet, pretty much. Every quarter note, which again, as a technique, kind of gives opportunity, as well as displacing things, actually getting stuff sidechained and pushed out the way, either spectrally with dynamic EQ or kind of just basically using a compressor. I think is a great way to make headroom and shape things so they sound like they're glued together. I get it. It's really quite a lot of people are using sidechain compression. I tell you what, actually, as a side note, people should try the sidechain expansion function, because in the presets of, I'm pretty sure it's in the presets, I'm embarrassed myself now, but I think you go down to there, or is it, or do you just actually, you can use expansion. So there we go. There it is. Sorry, yeah, it's not in the presets. I was thinking of OTT. You use this expansion, and then you can use a kick drum to increase the amplitude. I don't know whether you've ever had a go at that, but
oh, interesting. So as it hits it, it'll expand out instead of compress. Yeah.
It's a really nice way of creating kind of bumps, that lift whatever sound. So that could be a really nice synth pad that takes just a little bit of a bump every time the kick and snare hit it and
nice
stuff. But yeah,
is that in 11 only, or has that been there for a while?
I'm sure it's been there for a while, but I'm not sure why I thought it was a preset rather than an actual button that you push. But I think that's been in there a good while. But yeah, it's a lovely thing. It's worth trying, because if you're sidechain compressing something to duck it out the way, then and then you use the snare to lift something else, or maybe the same kick to lift something else. You create this interplay rhythmically and dynamically inside your production that can often give an awful lot of character and bring things together. And suddenly you don't feel like you need to keep adding more and more components. You're just making whatever is existing interact more intensely. So
nice.
Yeah,
great
sort of production
with
things.
With that wonky drums. I saw that you were going with the hi-hat, where it was that strong hit and then the followed up softer hit that was early, kind of the backwards swing feel. Was that done using the push, or what? How do you track that?
Actually, I think I messed it up because I played with the velocity earlier, so now they're all the same velocity. But yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It was they were the second of the two were brought down. That I think, looking at it, I think that was penciled in. This is it. I mean, I get, as you know, the jungle stuff. I do the beat pads, but oddly, unless I'm kind of playing something that I'm kind of more familiar with, that's more humanly possible to do, because some of this displacement of rhythm is really challenging for drummers to actually play. And I mean, that's just the magical thing I find so exciting is that drummers and stuff were at the forefront, and then house and lots of programmed music, lots of programmed rhythms made its way into the public domain. Lots of people listening to it, essentially listening to drum machines rather than drummers. But drummers would always then say, yeah, but real drums have got feel and they're played by a human, and they, you can't get away from that feel. Drum machines sound machine like, and they're and that was a pretty good argument right up until the point where programmers and producers started displacing components of drums in such a way, but like I was saying, holding that pattern but displacing it in a way that you would really struggle as a live drummer to mimic that kind of precision of timing, that getting those displacements exactly the same every single time. So then all of a sudden electronic drums and programming and production has introduced a feel to drumming that drummers can't even do. And there are some drummers that that are doing an incredible job of it, like people who play for like Flying Lotus and Nate Smith and the band Noah, I can't remember what he's called, Lucas or something, absolutely incredible drummers, and they've learned how to just displace their playing, but they've kind of copied what these electronic producers have put together. So
totally, yeah. Once they hear it, then they try and emulate the AI.
So to answer your question, I will place stuff to start with, just to get the framework of the rhythm and where I might want to sort of have bass drums fall and snares fall and stuff. But actually a lot of the playing I'll do will be for clients when I'm doing completely different genres. I've just done 2 recently, which is sort of, I need, the brief is I need acoustic drums on these 2 songs, and I've got 200 quid. Not going to even get a day in the studio for that. You just about get half a day in the studio with that. So I use Superior Drummer and Abbey Road drums and lots of really cool software, and emulate real drumming because I understand what real drummers do. And very often that starts with beat pads and getting a feel for, and actually feeling like you're playing the drums. I use a Roland SPD SX, the classic that you always see on stage, the black 9-pad thing, and I've got a kick drum, electronic kick drum for that. And if I really want to get it into the drums and playing patterns, I can kind of hook that gear up and trigger really good emulation software. But there is also the it's just the wonkiness is just too tight and fine tuned and needs to be perfect. So I can very often visualize that and see it on the screen, see it in the grid before I've done it, and kind of tend to pencil that stuff in. I think a bit of a healthy balance of both is
totally
the way to go.
Yeah, so it's like perfect offness.
Yes, perfect offness. That's a really good one. Yeah.
There's Radiohead, I guess it was like, I don't know, 8 to 10 years ago, came to San Francisco Outside Lands Festival, and I was super stoked on their set. And there was a moment that I remembered on their album where the drums literally feel like they come off the beat and then they come back on again. And I was like, okay, how intentional was that? Like, would they actually do that live? And it ended up being at that exact moment, he actually emulated the offness and then coming back on again. And I'm guessing that, like, I think that he was kind of toying with like how much a human drummer can feel and move the beat around the electronic, because they were doing some electronic stuff with their beat too.
Yeah,
but I
wonder what song that was.
Yeah, I wish I could think of it.
Because they've done a brilliant song called Pyramid Song, and that is very often gets everybody in terms of time signature, because it's got accents in places that sound like downbeats, but they're not. They're just before the downbeat. So it's a bit like a kind of 3/2 clave, bossa nova kind of rumba mix of rhythm patterns. So that would sound much more coherent to the ear if it's at a tempo that you can get it. It's, you know, that kind of thing. But when you slow it down to pyramid song tempo, it's kind of but. It's much slower, and it's actually slower than that again. And then if it's just the piano doing it, and without my left hand clicking to give you a sense of downbeat, you're then actually out there on your own with no timing reference, and you've only got your inner clock as a drummer to be able to kind of keep that tempo, like you said, kind of listen to it with the click, because the click sort of gives you a reference point. And I'm really fascinated by music that kind of plays with that timing and doesn't give you any reference point initially, and then you discover actually Pyramid Song is in 4/4. It's in 4/4 all the way through. So next time you listen to that and you listen to the intro, just sort of try and find a way of counting a very, very slow Latin kind of Cuban kind of polyrhythm thing against the click that you've got in your head, and you'll find it's 4/4, and I'm kind of fascinated by that.
Me too. It's such a cool thing to be able to, I mean, even like the basics of like reggae, just instead of being the downbeat, being the offbeat to get people dancing. I think it really moves people when people toy with the rhythm and it's not so exactly to the metronome on the 1 and 3 or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're finally getting it. What tended to happen was patterns have migrated from parts of the world that know an awful lot more about rhythm than Europe ever have, really. Let's face it. South America and stuff. Africa. But the thing is, by the time they get here, they're kind of shoehorned into palatable genres, and they are forcibly kind of.
It's almost quantized, right?
I was going to say that.
Pretend quantized.
Yeah, it is, but it's kind of humans thinking, well, you're attracting too much attention with all of that kind of syncopation and displacement and these funny kind of rhythms coming through that are still in 4/4, but it's the way they're subdivided and stuff. So they kind of simplify it, and we've kind of ended up taking the kind of life out of it. So now there's the opportunity to explore those rhythms back again and bring them in, and I do genuinely think that it's uncharted territory in terms of music appreciation. The crowd go nuts for it. The crowd go nuts for incredible bass lines and brilliant sound design, with no two ways about it. But rhythm does have this, primal quality to it that you can't escape, and everybody responds to that when it's messed with a little bit like, when you hear different tuning systems used, so the instruments you hear that are being played they wouldn't work with a piano with equal temperament, or a guitar that's been tuned to a tuner, because the tunings are very different. It does take your ear a little while to actually tolerate that. It's funny. It's kind of like a different accent. It's like a different language, but actually that it is still a language. It's still interpretable. You give it time, you let it in, you understand what's going on, and then you start thinking everything else sounds incredibly clinical and very quantized and very safe, whereas I'm not so interested in necessarily chasing all the scenes and trying to try to create what everybody else is creating. I quite happily take risks and crash and burn in the process, just trying to teach myself what the boundaries are of wonkiness. And I would say I'm still on the early road. I'm still learning. There's more to it, and there are a lot of people way ahead of me and stuff, but I'm getting there.
Very cool. I mean, I personally have only worked with the kick and snare, pushing it back in a mix to kind of create different feel, and I've worked with the hi-hat having different swings per se, but I don't think I've ever actually taken an entire swung hi-hat and then pulled it back like you just did. So that's a whole new kind of paradigm shift. There's a drummer, one of the best drummers I ever played with, Jesse Olswang. I grew up with him. He, every time in the studio, I would look at his waveforms and I'm like, what is so special about this guy? And I found out he was playing the kick and snare behind the beat perfectly as we're doing with MIDI tracks now, right? And he was doing that with his feel. And then I played with another drummer and he was putting it ahead of the beat perfectly. And so it's really like where the drummer finds what the relationship to the click is, which I really like how we were kind of hearing the click with it. And it's a great way to kind of learn a drummer, is like to be on the same page with you. Like if I'm a guitar player, do I play ahead of the beat with you or behind the beat? Am I on the snare or the hi-hat? Which one am I following kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to chat with you as a musician as well, because what that opens up is that I know that you've experienced playing and listening at the same time, and that I feel is such an important skill, that if a producer does tend to work in the box, doesn't particularly play with other people, then you can still explore that skill by you can still develop your ear and learn to listen from one component in context with another and do exactly that. You're thinking, I'm displacing the bass drum, I should probably lock the bass in with that bass drum, or if that's quite a clicky, funky kind of really nice bass, you may want the bass a little bit earlier, so that you hear the click of the kick drum, you hear the bass very slightly. There's a possibility that some of it might sound out of time, some of it might really, really work, but actually getting that live with somebody that's takes a long time, doesn't it, to develop that. I've worked with bassists before, and I've just made sure that kind of, they'll play a lot of fills. They'll actually, as 5 or 6 string bassists, love to just explore their fretboard every 4 bars, and that's exactly what drummers like to do. And bass guitars and toms sound quite similar to each other, unless they're really sort of very produced and stuff. Live gigs might not always be like that, so there's that territory as well, is that I know that person every 4 or 8 bars is going to pull half a bar of fill running down through the notes, and I probably should pick something sonically that's very contrasting with that, like basically I do my little fill on the snare, and then work out where else tom fills could go other than just at the ends of each cycle, kind of Human League style toms, once in a lifetime, the tom pattern built into the actual rhythm rather than it being a fill, and stuff, and it doesn't get in the way of a bass guitar at all. So but definitely swapping between one musician and another is incredible. You would have thought that a drum beat is a drum beat, but no,
it's a different
depends who's
palette.
playing it.
Exactly. My favorite bass players, I would say, are the ones that can do that dance with the drummer and understand if they're ahead or behind, and choose to play with the kick or against it, depending on what style of music they're doing.
There's a kind of cool way, if you're kind of a hybrid band that you play to click and play with components that are coming off of Ableton Live as a backing track, or someone's using push and triggering various different things, is to one thing I've done actually is to experiment with sending people different click tracks and then using the sort of delay function here. You can still see my screen, can't you?
Yeah. Using
the kind of delay function here to basically offset someone's click, or doing it manually in in the piano roll, inside a clip, or shifting clicks as audio along the grid. But either way, what you do is you just kind of give them a click that's late, and they reference that kind of a bit louder than other components, and maybe deprive them of a few timing parts so that they can really get focused on a click that's very slightly behind, and then you record them, so you get that natural displacement, obviously of the whole instrument. But if you were doing that if you gave a very funky, clicky kind of clean electric guitarist sound, you gave them a slightly late click to work with, and didn't give them so much hi-hat in their mix and things like that. This is kind of all just kind of experimental techniques you can use in the studio. It might be a bit of a risk doing that live, but you can actually warp the timing of the band intentionally.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. That's like really painting by all tools of the digital audio workstation and the live music person. The drummer that played ahead of the beat, I was like, if I knew that trick then, I would have recorded him in the studio with a 25 millisecond delay, because with the click.
Well, that's true. I mean, and the other thing is, it's like we were saying about, once you've got a phrase down, once you've got a pattern down, then that could be solid in itself, but then you can displace that. The beauty of it is that a drummer could come in and metronomically just lay down the most solid on the grid beat and earn their money, and then that's a starting point. And then the beauty is that you can then grab those components and actually displace them yourself. Even a live kit, obviously there are warp functions in Ableton Live, and now with 11 you can actually link all of those components up, and you've been able to do that for a while, haven't you? You kind of basically move one warp marker, and you actually displace the whole drum track, so maybe 16 mics or something. So you can play around with that. That's really cool. And the other thing that's really cool about warping and stuff is I've done videos. You drop videos into live and actually remap the time of the video. So if you've got a drummer that's playing a really solid beat that you've nicked off of YouTube, you can stick it in there and actually remap and play around with the timing of their playing in the videos. So it makes for a really good video for your track as well.
Nice. Speeding up to slowing down.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's cool.
Very cool. And then I'm curious too, around the velocities, have you used randomization, or are you normally just kind of pulling up and down exactly how you want it?
Yeah, that's another one. I mean, it looks quite fixed here. So there's not a huge amount of dynamics within this lot. But I do very much like approaching things as to sort of, using velocities to create expression and stuff. So that, unfortunately, that isn't a fantastic example of it, but maybe, the reason for that is actually that some of these components, you don't start with a drum kit that's kind of normalized all the samples of the same volume anyway. So, but yeah, I've got a bit of velocity stuff here. I'm a huge fan of dynamics, and that really is the only way you can get that's another way of creating feel. It's incredible that the amount of things, pitch is probably one of them, timing is another one, and amplitude, dynamics. The velocity, I quite often I'll use velocity that's kind of assigned to various other parameters in a synth as well. If I'm using operator, use velocity to bring the amplitude up of the additional oscillators or operators, as you would call them. And there's an awful lot you can do with that, maybe in synth sounds and stuff.
Nice. Really cool stuff, man. I really appreciate your wisdoms in drumming and also producing, and how you can sit behind the kit, or you can get behind literally just the DAW with all of these different plugins and do phenomenal work. And this drum.
I must
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say one day I want to show you the what happens when you combine the two and you set up Ableton Live as a drum kit and production, and then use an electronic kit to trigger the entire production. So you essentially you are the sequencer, so rather than having clips in the session view or anything in the arrangement view. You have one drum rack with about 128 samples and various different instruments. You just use one drum rack and then trigger the whole thing. That's
nice. And that's with the electric drum kit that you have, per se? Yeah, that sounds super fun.
A lot of people doing it at the moment. So if anybody's interested in that, Ableton Drummer is one guy that's really pioneering that kind of technique, hybrid drumming, or actually just exclusively electronic drumming. But he also creates a lot of Max for Live instruments that make it easier for live drummers to operate Ableton Live with using your drumsticks. So you can hit various other pads and it will trigger a set of commands that will,
Make a sound,
move you on to the next scene or something, or move you up to the next marker in the arrangement, and an awful lot of things, or various different conversions. So you can use velocity to continuous controller conversion. So when you're playing something, you're kind of you're also controlling something else with the how kind of hard or soft you strike the pads and stuff.
Nice.
So that's a really nice thing. It's an incredibly satisfying experience to have all that power of everything you've just created in Ableton Live
at your fingertips,
massive production, and then at the ends, at the tips of your sticks.
Yeah, exactly.
Adam Betts is another Ableton drummer that you should probably check out. He's also the drummer of he drums for Goldie and Three Trap Tigers. Goldie, the drum and bass producer. So he's got some really amazing solo project called Colossal Squid, and me on the other hand, I'm kind of getting there.
Nice. Well, I'm super inspired to work with you and trade files via Splice. Just because it sounds like what you're doing with your hi-hat is essentially making a feel that feels good to me without even moving the kick and snare, essentially, which is, I haven't really thought of that. And also for everyone else listening to this, I'm personally going to go back and listen back to all the different little tidbits of listen to this song. Is it Pyramid from Radiohead you mentioned?
Oh, Pyramid Song.
Pyramid Song, and then you just mentioned some drummers. Ableton drummer.
Listen to Nate Smith. He's a great drummer. Adam Betts is a really good drummer. I think the band Noah, incredible drumming.
Nice.
That's KNO ER. They're great. I mean, and if you want to check out some really deep, dark, displaced, wonky rhythms, I think OM Unit, OHM Unit, and Ivy Lab, sort of London-based, very deep, dark stuff, and halftime and bass music, and but I love Flume. Flume's got some really lovely displaced. He's incredible producer. He's got some brilliant ideas, and I've got to admit, I kind of steal, just because of my, fascination with the size of those super saws and just how many oscillators he's got in unison.
Nice.
And that with the beautiful kind of vocal, always a great melody, but always a really hard hitting drop. But not in the, I don't mean that kind of drop. Very musical. It's got to be kind of deep and dark and musical for me. I'm not sure why, but
that's awesome. And then this is kind of old school probably by now, but I found Mode Selector through Radiohead back in the day. Is that any influence you have, or with
Mode Selector?
Mode Selector. I used to call them Modest Selector. Have you heard of them?
No, I don't. Oh my goodness, I don't think I have. Have I or not?
Selector with a K, actually.
Mode Selector. Well, there you go. You've given me one to check out. I'm not sure. I might have heard some of the key tracks, but actually that's not something that springs to mind. So
lots of the odd, weird glitchiness of Radiohead, I think they were grabbing from Mode Selector, which is like a electronic music production kind of group.
Yeah, because Yeah, because the Kid A sessions and Amnesia, or as Amnesiac, those Kid A sessions, there was this kind of idea that they basically bought up the entire back catalogue of Warp Records, and that mixed with a bit of Aphex Twin. I'm only from just up the road from Aphex Twin. I'm not sure now. I don't think he lives in Cornwall now, but the likes of him and Luke Vibert and stuff, I think they had a great deal of influence, as well as the other artists on the Warp label, and that really played with Radiohead really played with that electronic and acoustic hybrid, and somehow just incredible. Those sessions and those developments, I think they lost half of their diehard fans and gained
quite a bit too,
a load more as well. It's the bravest move, isn't it?
Drop their label too and releasing stuff on their own.
Yes, I mean, I don't doubt they might have had a few bucks in the bank, so it's it might not have deemed to be quite the risk that it appeared. But in terms of creative risk, I think they put themselves out there and were prepared to actually change the demographic of their audience and their fans. And rather than that kind of loyalty to them that perhaps might make you try and write your first hit over and over and over again. And I just think when you release yourself of that burden and actually just think, I should be just writing what I want to write. There's real estate out there, there's territory out there that you didn't know existed within you. Just make sure you're making the music that you want to hear, and that's what I try to do, as I'm trying to make the music that's kind of answering some burning question in me. It's I don't know what it is.
Totally.
I'm enjoying the journey.
And speaking of that, Kristian, what's the best way for people to listen to your music and your creations? Is there a certain area online?
Well, that's actually an interesting question, because at the moment I'm everything I'm doing is very much low key, and I would say it's in development. So there's something I don't do a great job of, and that is self-promote. So I'm going to have to get back to you on that because I don't actually have things in one place. I produced an album many moons ago under the name A Band on Hope, or A Band on Hope, and that's on Spotify. And if you're into some really interesting, quirky examples of how hip hop hasn't gone, with some really incredible lyrics from Illiterate, my good friend and colleague, there's something to get started on. But in terms of all of this new material, I think the clips on Instagram, which is just in my name, at Kristian Sharpe, or Kristian Sharpe with a K, and Sharpe with an E. If you find me on there, flick through, there is some of little snippets of what I've been playing with over the last few years.
Nice. Well, I will put some efforts into finishing a track with you. Super stoked on that. If anyone's interested in learning from Kristian Sharpe, he's been teaching in the UK in person, and he's also available online via sf.garnishmusicproduction.com. And he's a phenomenal teacher. Really stoked to meet you and just kind of go through this process of kind of, first of all, finding like a really cool video you created, I think on Facebook initially, on some Ableton group, and just mentioning, that I liked it. And then you got back really sweetly and nicely. And it's kind of manifested into this ongoing relationship that I'm really excited to foster and put some time and energy into, both from the SF Garnish school that we're creating in the Bay Area and at large. There's 8 locations worldwide. But also from a musical perspective, there's not too many drummers that cross the barrier of live drumming and go into production and feel and kind of understand those two worlds. I know a lot of amazing drummers that I'm like, if only they got into Ableton too, right? And so, and you're doing that. So I just really want to give you props for that, and like let you know that I want to, like, it's on my radar to get back to maybe sending you a track or something, a track or two via Splice, and collaborating.
Yeah, absolutely. I look forward to it. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm be really intrigued as to what we could come up with. I can't wait.
Nice. And how long is this track that you just created here? And you said you kind of created this during that last video you did for SF Garnish.
Yeah, well, you know, at the moment, I think at the moment it's only actually a couple of minutes, three minutes. And it sort of goes through. It does that thing that you do when you haven't written maybe a third section. I think that's what it really needs, because it's an A-B-A kind of arrangement at the moment, and it needs its C. And I think that's probably what I'm going to have a play with actually this evening, is just kind of finding that third section that I can drop into, and I reckon that we're reasonably close then to having something completed. But that's if I don't start something else.
Yes, that's the goal, right? Stay focused enough to complete the project and move on from there.
That is a skill.
Totally. And I'm really stoked that, like, it seems like you have a lot of track potentials to complete and have your own catalog of music for video and commercial use. So I would love to talk with you more about that offline, because we have a few outlets ourselves that might kind of foster that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm looking at a kind of, I don't know what we've got here. You probably can't see, but it's about 6-7 tracks I had lined up, because I wasn't sure how many we would get through in this one. But yeah.
Nice, like kind of almost done tracks.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, some and with a similar kind of cohesion between one track and another that would make for a kind of good solid EP or half an album. But yeah, there's quite a few. I think the last time I checked, I have somewhere in the region of 1,200 projects on Splice.
Oh wow!
And all of them are just explorations of various techniques, and could all be. Some of them are nearly finished. But it's funny. It's just like I'm a technician, and I'm really into that, and I feel the social media thing possibly sometimes it pollutes the freedom to just explore. I took the weight off my shoulders of not being an artist and just being a musicologist, really.
We're actually just about out of time right now, and I'd love to kind of wrap things up with you. There we go. Awesome, it did work. Just give people a great heads up on Kristian Sharpe and his skills in teaching, in production. I don't want to take up your production time here. I really appreciate you taking this hour, and I feel a deeper connection to you to work in music and keep educating people in their digital audio workstations. Once again, my name is Justin with SF Garnish. This is what we do on our Wednesdays from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Today we talked with Kristian Sharpe from the UK, one of our teachers at SF Garnish Music Production. And we'll be talking about different digital audio workstations, primarily Ableton, because that's my preference personally. And that's what we worked on today with Kristian. And we're going to go out with this. Really appreciate you guys out there. Please like and subscribe. And if you saw this and want to re-listen to what Kristian was saying around, which song to listen to or which artist, you can check it out on our Twitch page, our YouTube, our Facebook, our social media. So once again, thanks so much and have a great day. Cheers.